Frustration here, and there's a lot of frustration in our society. Some of the points I'm going to make, not everybody would necessarily agree with, but I think it's a matter of, just in response to Bernadette's point, of discussing these things openly in a proper spirit. I think a lot of sniping on the left has decreased quite a bit, just even from judging this we just discuss these things, and crucially, we have to think tactically, because we're in a difficult situation and we have to find ways of getting out of this in the coming period. So just in response to some of the points on the floor, I'm not totally, in all situations, against leaving particular unions. I mean, we've had a situation, the bus workers a situation where Eugene McDonough was stitched up by his own union and the management. We have all the evidence. They literally wanted to get rid of a troublemaker, as they would see it, and they stitched him up. Shocking situation, right? And in that situation, a tactical decision was made by bus workers to leave the NRBU and go to SIP2. And by the way, why would you go to SIP2? But just for the point of view of putting them under huge pressure, that was a tactical decision that was made. So I think that was the right tactic in that particular situation. If I was in Batu, I'm not fully familiar with it, but so maybe I'll leave that to Tommy what you would say in that situation. But I can see exactly why you'd want to leave Batu. But I just want to back up the points about it's not a general strategy and it's not going to work in general terms. And I'll tell you why. The reality is at the moment is that people are not leaving the unions in droves. It's not true, right? A lot of people are coming back into the unions. Do you know why? Because people are frightened, right? And if you're an individual in your job and there's no protection, at the very least, you want something to back you up, right? The membership figures in SIP2 have fallen by 10,000, about 180,000 to 170,000. Actually, that indicates they've recruited a lot of people. For example, in the community sector, recruiting people. So, therefore, it's not true that masses of people are leaving unions. Okay? That's the way to start with that tactical point, right? Secondly, we have to look at what the issue here, the problem is. The problem is that the union, I think what the union leader strategy is. The union leader strategy is sit it out, draw up the, draw a bridge, keep the members out of decision making and sit out the recession, and they know not too many people will leave the unions and will keep the union dues coming in. That's what they think, and they don't give a damn about us. And they don't give a damn about it. They think we're going to mouth off and so on. And the reason why they don't give a damn about us is that we haven't got leverage. We haven't got enough pressure points on them. They know that the biggest demonstration that's happened in Dublin has been, obviously like inspired by the left, has been about 2,000 people, right? And they know there's not enough leverage on them. So the crucial thing we have to move to is building a network that is strong and is moving forward and actually forces, if you like, them to make a response, and we then have to respond to their tokenistic response. So maybe I want to explain that point slightly differently. If you look at experience in Greece, talking to Greek trade unions, how did the movement begin in Greece, right? It began because people in groups like this began to had enough people coming on the streets of Athens that the union leaders got frightened. If we don't run ahead of this movement, they're going to take it away from us, right? So there was something coming from below that eventually forced them to respond, right? If you look, for example, at German unions, you had a movement called Attack, which was campaigning on the Tobin tax, mobilised a lot of people in Germany, and that in turn forced the union leaders to respond. The problem in Ireland is there has not been a significant mobilisation of people from below to force these characters even to begin tokenistic responses. And I think if they had a tokenistic response, we would have to try to magnify that response and make it bigger. So therefore, to come back on the question of the demonstration in December. Yes, it's true, it did come from an initiative of United Left Alliance. We wrote to the trades camps, we wrote to community groups and so on. And one of the things we're campaigning, I'm speaking to the United Left Alliance here, the United Left Alliance hat on, is that we want to see a united demonstration. We want the community, the spectacle of defiance, coming in with the Trades Council, coming in with networks like this to produce a serious demonstration, a pre-budget demonstration in December. And that is important. And therefore we're all going to have to argue for unity. And I would suggest on the Trades Council, if the Trades Council calls a demonstration in Dublin by itself, you'll get what? 1,000, 2,000 people, right? If the community does it, 1,000, 2,000 people and so on. Unless we come together, we have to argue for this in the community meetings on the Trades Council, we have to come together to put a bit of backbone behind the resistance so these people who think we mean nothing at least get a bit worried. That's a very, very crucial task over the coming period. I agree with Diarmuid on that one actually. I think it's also important that if we're going to be taken seriously, we have to be an organisation of struggle, right? I want to make a very practical proposal. There are nurses going on strike. in Limerick next Thursday, isn't it? Fair play to people. 4 hours giving up your pay to, if you like, defend patient care and so on. We should send a delegation from this meeting down to them saying, we're part of, I don't know what our name is and so on, the National Shop Stewards Network and so on, and say, we want to support you, we're giving you greetings to this conference, and we want to get you involved in that. I think we've got to take those practical actions. We should obviously raise funds to send people who are unemployed or able to go down at that particular point. Last 2 points quickly. Sorry, last point is on the issue of the unemployment. I agree with that. I think that it's important that the unemployed are brought back into the unions. A very interesting thing happened in Waterford this week, right? And most unions, when workers who are not in the union are being made redundant, don't want to know because they're not going to pay the dues back into unions. The Unite in Waterford, fair play, organised a meeting for Talk workers. 400 people turned up. Non-union turned up to that and so on. So taking seriously organising the unemployed, people who are not in unions, the benefits to Unite, I believe, is that if you're seen to stand by people facing redundancies, when those workers go into the next job, they'll begin to think in union terms. So I think it's important we have mass organisation of the unemployed, and genuine, it's not a tokenistic thing that people are brought back into the unions. Very last point quickly, I do want to agree with Bendini on the point of political trade unionism. I think you're right. Unless we can convince a big enough layer of people to have the political understanding that we shouldn't bail out the banks, we shouldn't rely on the IMF, we should talk about cancelling the debt. If you don't have that, it becomes harder to motivate people into action. So you need a critical layer of people who are solid politically in arguing, for example, for cancelling the debt of the IMF and everything that follows from that.
Target for organising, and it didn't deliver. That was the truth. And then when it came on top for the workers, it was still correct for us to step forward and play a role for lots of reasons. Flowing from that, there was a conference there only this week in Unite, and people said, well, actually, rather than just those initiatives and rather than just having an unemployment rate when someone is unemployed, we should actually have a role in terms of organising and assisting the unemployed. And the proposal there coming from that was that the rate would be a nominal rate, 32 cents or something like that. So initiatives are being taken, but obviously people need to bring those initiatives back into the union and say, well, if one union can do it, another union can do it. And the obvious point is the link between workers who are actually physically working and organised, and then workers who aren't working. You know, those arguments can be made very simply. Just in terms of some of the key points, in terms of the point I think Kevin made there about austerity and the attacks around people, you know, I actually, I think for ordinary people, right, I think you do have to be concise and sharp in terms of the language you use, but there's also the point, I think people understand on a day-to-day basis the onslaught that they're facing. We get this thing from Unite, a breakdown of what's happening in the media at any one point in time. It's a helpful item, and there's 2 articles side by side. The Irish Examiner ran both of them. Taoiseach Enda Kenny said yesterday that we are unable to do anything about the cuts in fuel allowance that will affect 630,000 pensioners this winter, and almost the same breath announced that he would not rule out AIB requests to pay more than 500,000 annual salary to its incoming chief executive. Clearly a case for the haves and the have-nots. And I think working class people, that point is not lost on. You don't need, as Bob Dylan said, a weatherman to tell you which way the wind is blowing. It's absolutely the case that people are looking, and our task then, our task, and I think people made a point here, our task is to give expression to that anger and expression to that mood that's out there. In terms of the point about the trade union movement, and obviously it's a given that the trade union movement, I think Comrade made a point there, we all know what they've done. They've acted largely as managers. Response comes, austerity, okay, how do we shape it, what do we do? They actually have managed, operated as managers for the whole period of time. And then what's the alternative? Do we leave the unions? Do we remain in the unions? And it's a very difficult one to argue against. Just for my tuppence worth on it, during the Batu strike, we'd been 9 months on strike, and at a certain point in time we were grappling with the idea of stepping outside of a Batu and having the leading people link into an alternative. Didn't necessarily take shape, and fair enough, but in the lifespan of Batu, the heroic battles that bricklayers and carpenters and so on fought, which, you know, it's well documented, right? And people in the room here made significant sacrifices, I do know that. But one thing, and I hope Tony will agree with me, the one thing that we didn't do over the decade of 1996 to 2006, we didn't replace the leadership. because our programme was to fight builders, take what we needed from the industry, but the agenda wasn't there to say we'll take the union as well. We left them in space, the economic situation turned, the external environment changed, and we were found wanting because there was an absence of political understanding. There was an absence that we have two battlefronts. One is in the workplaces and the other is in the trade union. Laura Waters from Lord Ashley fully understands that, because very quickly those workers realised that actually, do you know what, we're not going to get the support from very fancy trade union officials. We're actually going to get the support from ordinary working class people. That clicked into place very quickly. Very lastly, what do we do? And someone made the point that, I think speakers made the point that, you know, we've been here before, we've done this, we've done that, we've done the other. And every time we're back to the same situation. I don't know a lot about Connolly's works, but 2 points that I do understand. The need for action. Obviously we're all up to that, but it needs to be linked to a programme to actually achieve certain changes. And then he also made a point about the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. We are going to get knocked back, we are going to get hammered, but it doesn't mean we stop, and it absolutely doesn't mean we give those bureaucrats our trade unions. I'm not prepared to do that, I really am. Very last point, very last point. Someone said to me after the Bath strike, an acquaintance said to me, geez, you must be sick of the trade union movement, Tom. Sure, why would you be involved with them again? The damage that they did, they sold you out, etc, etc. And very quickly I found myself defending. And he said, why would you defend the likes of them, Begg, O'Connor and others? I said, you're missing the point. That's not the trade union movement. The trade union movement is what kept us going for 9 months in strike. People like Jerry coming down with a bucket and putting money in it and supporting us. Ordinary workers coming up and paying a sub into our bucket. 9 months on strike and we were kept going. That's the trade union movement, and that's what we need to remember. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Tom.